Good evening, and thank you all for being here tonight. Your willingness to give your time and your financial support to this organization means the world to ovarian cancer patients, survivors, and families like mine. I'm honored to have this opportunity to speak with you and to pay tribute to my recently departed mother, Monica Layton. Throughout her battle with ovarian cancer, which lasted almost 6 years, she was one of the faces of this organization and was extremely passionate about its mission and about all kinds of advocacy work. I hope to give you some insight on what it's like to live with an ovarian cancer patient until the end and what helped me get through it. One person's experience with this is exactly that, one person's experience. I would never presume to speak for families of other cancer patients or to know what they need or have been through. I won't attempt to speak for other members of my family either. I'm not excluding anyone deliberately, but I've been asked to provide my own personal perspective, and that's all I'll speak about, since that's all I'm really qualified to. I encourage you to talk to the other members of my family and to other survivors and their families to hear their unique stories too. As I'll talk about more in a few minutes, one of the most important things in Mom's life was her involvement at our church and the constant, unwavering support she received from it. When we had her Requiem Mass there on January 6th, the priest and family friend who delivered the homily quoted things that Mom's friends had said about her on social media. The most frequently used words and phrases included things like inspiring, a warrior, courageous, positive, hilarious, full of faith, dignified, steadfast, full of love and joy. While all of those things are certainly accurate, I think there's an important one missing from the list: selfless. You'll hear me say that word selfless a lot tonight, as it can be used to describe Mom in every attribute and experience that I can remember. Monica Layton was diagnosed with stage 3C metastatic ovarian cancer on March 5th, 2018, the night my world came crashing down, though I didn't fully realize it at the time. My family and I were in a hospital waiting room while Mom was in surgery to remove what she thought was a small benign mass. I will never forget the visceral reaction I had when the surgeon described what she had removed and succinctly said they were cancerous. I will also never forget the interactions we had with Mom when she awoke from anesthesia. The first thing she did when she regained consciousness was smile at us. That smile quickly turned upside down when she saw us all with tears in our eyes while my dad broke the news to her. Still, 6 years later, that stands out as one of the worst moments of this journey. Immediately after this devastating conversation, she called me over to the bed and grabbed my hand and told me not to worry. This was the first of countless examples of her selflessness. Mere moments after receiving this life-changing diagnosis, her first inclination was to make sure that her baby was okay. The very next week, she began an 18-week course of chemotherapy. It took me until the third week, when she started losing her hair, ultimately deciding to shave it, to fully realize and accept the fact that my mother was, in fact, a cancer patient and that there was a chance that I could lose her because of it. My grandparents took her to almost all of her treatments. Every week was its own roller coaster of emotions, wondering how the labs would look to see if she could even get treated. I remember sitting at school anxiously awaiting her text message every week. She had several delays because her immune system was severely impacted by the drugs, making her very vulnerable to infection. Even so, she got through it and finished all 18 treatments. That course of chemotherapy had appeared to be successful, and she received lots of encouraging results from it. Pictured here on her last day of treatment, she was sure that she was going to be one of the lucky few whose cancer didn't return, and a few weeks later, her routine scans confirmed that she was in remission. This remission lasted almost 18 months and freed her both mentally and physically to be by my side for the entirety of 2019, one of the most formative years of my life. We took our first trip to Europe together with my high school choir. She took me to my first Kentucky Oaks race at Churchill Downs so I could watch her walk in the Survivors Parade. She attended some of my most memorable musical performances, including my senior voice and organ recital and a performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which she sang herself in college. She saw me graduate high school. She journeyed to Washington, D.C. 2 weekends in a row to see me take part at an incredible experience at the National Cathedral. And she saw me start college pursuing my dream career of music education. That year was full of countless good experiences and memories and lots of travels that were decidedly not impacted by her diagnosis. That was the happiest I'd been since March of 2018. In January 2020, my world came crashing down all over again when Mom received news of her recurrence. She opted to travel all the way to Florida to have a specialist perform an aggressive procedure to try to remove it again. I don't think that's her on the table, but that is her surgeon. The cancer, once again, was much more widespread than the surgeon initially thought, and the surgery was extensive. Recovery from that procedure was very difficult, but once again, demonstrating her selflessness, the first thing she did when we got back to the hotel room after her discharge was get on her phone and order pizza for the rest of us who had traveled with her. While still in some of the worst pain she had ever experienced, her first concern was about feeding her family. When she returned home to Louisville, she began another 18-week course of chemotherapy, and the constant anxiety that I had been free from for over a year returned. This treatment didn't make her lose her hair, but it had the same effect on her immune system, which was especially stressful at the beginning of the pandemic. Nonetheless, she made it through that whole round of treatment COVID-free. She was once again in remission, but only for about 6 months this time before another recurrence. Her third go-round with ovarian cancer started at the beginning of 2021 with yet another different course of chemotherapy. After about 6 rounds, routine scans showed that her cancer had progressed despite the intense regimen. She started a different set of drugs right away, but at that moment, the goal of her treatment was changed from curative intent to stable disease. At that moment, we had to accept that her cancer would never go away again. We had to accept that she would be on some form of chemotherapy for the rest of her life, and that this was our new normal. At the time, her best hope was that she would eventually qualify for a clinical trial for one of the many drugs in development. Alas, her doctors were never able to find one that would work for her, and she just had to work with the limited options she had left. Beginning in 2021, she started trying all the different regimens that were still available, never staying on the same one for more than a few months because each subsequent scan showed progression. Hope was slowly declining. December 4th, 2022 was a significant turning point. I remember that week so vividly because she attended one of my performances of Handel's Messiah at the Cathedral of the Assumption while in terrible abdominal pain that she had been complaining about all week. Again, selfless. And decided immediately after the performance that it was time to go to the ER. When she was finally admitted and properly examined, her doctors discovered that she had a significant complication that could only be resolved with a colostomy that she would have to keep for the rest of her life. She had successfully lived as normally as possible up until that point, but when I heard this development, I knew that everything about her lifestyle and day-to-day activity was about to change. I had my audition for graduate school the very next day, so the stress and anxiety I was already experiencing was compounded by this news. She hadn't even been home from the hospital for a week before having to go back. It turned out that there was yet another unforeseen complication, and she left the hospital that time with a nephrostomy, now carrying her waste products on both her front and her back. At the time, the nephrostomy, which she described as feeling like a constant knife in the back, stood out as the most painful and unpleasant experience of her cancer treatment and management. Along with her new appendages, she started yet another new regimen of chemotherapy. Her lifestyle changed dramatically, and there was a clear shift in her demeanor and attitude, which she had tried so hard to keep positive all those years. The first few months of 2023 were filled with unpleasant experiences and procedures. However, she got the good news in April that her nephrostomy could safely be removed. She immediately started feeling better, and the difference in her pain level was obvious. She was still never without pain, and the chemo regimen she was on at the time caused her to need a wheelchair outside of the house, but her symptoms stayed manageable enough for her to be by my side during another formative period of my life. She saw me graduate with my bachelor's degree, enthusiastically followed my world travels online and lived vicariously through them, and she saw me start graduate school. While we understood how serious her condition still was following the events of the previous December, we did regain some hope in the summer of 2023 when she was cleared to try a new experimental drug. After a few weeks on it, her initial labs and scans did demonstrate a slowdown in her disease progression. I was convinced that this was the miracle we had been hoping for all along. It seemed for a few weeks that we heard all the answers and information that we wanted to hear, and I truly believed that there was a chance that this new drug had the potential to cure her. Needless to say, that was short-lived. We were able to celebrate my birthday together in early November and had a great time, but just a few days later, she started having the same symptoms that had taken her to the ER almost a year before. She was in and out of the hospital almost constantly for several weeks. Once again, her doctors discovered that her complications were more significant than they thought, which seemed to be the theme of all of her previous procedures. And the difficult decision was made to give her a full gastrostomy, meaning that she would never be able to eat solid food again, and her only source of nutrition would be from daily, self-administered IV fluids. As I heard her doctors explaining all of this, the only positive thing I could think of was that the last solid meal she ever ate and digested normally was my birthday dinner, which I know she thoroughly enjoyed. That night, my 23rd birthday, is my final thoroughly pleasant memory with her. The more I learned about this latest development and the more I watched her try to cope with it at home, the more I realized that it was not sustainable for long. I knew the end was near, but it was still unpredictable enough to drive me insane. I knew it could be as long as months or as short as a few weeks or even days. I work best by planning ahead far into the future, a trait I clearly inherited from her. So the mindset of taking it one day at a time did not work well for me at all and was a source of great stress. I was very close to completing my first semester of graduate school and fiercely trying to stay on top of that, but I knew that she was at the stage where I needed to be prepared to drop everything and rush home at any given moment. Her condition continued to deteriorate, and her pain continued to increase to unprecedented levels. Most upsetting of all, she completely lost hope. That smile she was so famous for disappeared, positive attitude and demeanor she had consistently kept for almost 6 years became negative, and she no longer had the will to fight. Seeing her clear shift in attitude hit me just as hard as seeing her in all that pain. Ever since her diagnosis, she had been constantly hopeful and optimistic, and seeing that go away communicated to me how dire the situation actually was. The first week of December, I had been going to classes and rehearsals as normal, and I'd begun final exams. I was in the middle of a rehearsal when I got the dreaded text that I needed to get home right away. She had made the decision earlier that day to discontinue her IV fluids and to let nature take its course. That whole drive home, I was convinced that she only had moments left. I braced myself for that night to be the last time I saw her alive. I didn't expect her to live for 6 more days after that, and I don't mind admitting that I wish she hadn't. Those final 6 days were completely miserable for her and for those of us who had to sit and watch. She received great care from her hospice nurses, but there was still a limit to what they could do. As I watched her gradually decline, I couldn't escape thoughts like, I came from that body. I'm the only person on earth that came from that body, the only person on earth that body gave life to, and now it's being destroyed from the inside out. Thoughts like these, while watching the source of my own creation, and mine alone, slowly deteriorate, caused me secondhand physical pain in addition to the emotional pain I'd been experiencing for days, or rather for years. After 2 more days, she was unrecognizable as a person. She lay in bed almost completely unconscious all day, and when she did briefly wake up, she was completely incoherent. It was as if her body was still alive, but her soul was not in it. She never got the nephrostomy tube back, so she still had to go to the bathroom sometimes, but my dad and I quite literally had to carry her in there each time because every ounce of her strength was gone. As horrid as this all was, I was still determined to finish out the semester, so I sat in her bed with her and worked on my computer nonstop for days to complete as many of my final tasks as possible. I refused to leave her side even for one moment. I ended up pulling several all-nighters in her room and ended up falling asleep next to her several times. I got my last paper turned in just before she took her final turn for the worse on the night of December 10th. I was prepared and was hoping that she would slowly drift away while she slept one of those days, but unfortunately it wasn't nearly that simple. For the first time in days, I had to give myself a break and go to my room and put headphones in because I could not handle witnessing her in that condition. I'd obviously heard and used the phrase, "I can't take it anymore," countless times in my life, but this experience taught me what that feeling is actually like. As determined as I was to stay by her side until her last breath, I just had to leave. When I did decide to go back into her room, the hospice nurse had managed to ease her pain a bit. Not completely, but enough that I could tolerate being in the room with her. Around 1 a.m., my dad called the immediate family over to be there with her when she passed. I kept hoping that moment was only minutes away, but the hospice nurse predicted that it would be a few hours, and I accidentally fell asleep in the bed next to her. I was awakened just before 3 by the sound of several people crying, and I knew that she was gone. My only reaction was to breathe a sigh of relief. I knew that she was no longer suffering, no longer in any pain, and I myself felt an intense feeling of liberation. Even today, almost 2 months later, my primary feeling is relief. This feeling was articulated perfectly by Annelle in Steel Magnolias, Mom's all-time favorite movie. She just wanted to take care of everybody she knew, and her poor little body was just worn out. It just wouldn't let her do all the things she wanted to, so she went on to a place where she could. Be a guardian angel, she will always be young, she will always be beautiful, and I personally feel much safer knowing that she's up there on my side. I couldn't explain it better myself. In addition to that relief, my next most prominent feeling is admiration. While I will certainly never forget it, I choose not to think about her death, but rather about her life and the way she lived. As difficult as her circumstances were, she was determined not just to survive, but to live. She once said to me, "What's the point of a longer life if I'm not making the most of every day?" She never wanted to miss important moments waiting for her health to improve or for chemo to be over. She always made her treatments work around her life, not the other way around. In the first few months into treatment, the first time, she went on 2 mountain vacations where she went hiking and ziplining, and she never missed a year of decades-long traditional family beach vacation until 2023. She came to almost every musical performance of my high school and undergraduate career, and in the summer of 2022, she took on the difficult and thankless task of planning a 4-generation trip to Walt Disney World, where she took care of a sometimes unruly family and hopped on some roller coasters that she never thought she would just to experience them with me. Again, selfless. That same summer, we traveled to Europe together for the second time and were gifted with opportunities to see the wonders of the world and to sing together in great cathedrals, one of the most precious experiences that we ever shared. Those memories were a major source of support for her and for me throughout this ordeal. She also had great friends who were always there for her. Battling this disease is impossible without that support, and it doesn't take much. Phone calls, texts, and of course, good times together can mean a great deal. As important as family and friends are, sometimes it just helps to talk to someone who has walked the same path. When she was first diagnosed almost 6 years ago, she didn't know anything about ovarian cancer, and she didn't know anyone else fighting the disease. The internet is full of very scary statistics and bleak outcomes, so it was pretty overwhelming. She needed good information and a network of people with similar experiences. Oak provided her with both of those. Her first introduction to the group was at the Toast to Life Survivors Brunch, a wonderful event with great food, wonderful speakers, and important fellowship. It's not a fundraiser, and survivors don't pay to be there. It is simply a celebration of survivorship and a source of inspiration. She took my great-great-aunt with her every year, who has survived ovarian cancer for almost 50 years. It was at that brunch that she first met her friend and fellow survivor, Sherry Hauber, who leads survivors teaching students in our area. Mom worked with doctors in her job as a pharmaceutical rep, so teaching medical students about ovarian cancer seemed like a perfect fit. She had no idea how much that would mean to her. It ignited a passion in her for educating others. The best hope for advancement in ovarian cancer treatment starts with education and information. As she said in her own speech at this event 2 years ago, "My hope lies in this research that we are here supporting tonight." She never asked the question, why me, but instead asked, why anyone? Why does this have to happen? No one will ever be able to answer that question, but the idea that her situation, her story, could save someone else helped her to make sense of it all. This sense of purpose led her to look for other ways to educate others. She enjoyed public speaking and sales, so she sought out opportunities to use those skills. She knew she couldn't speak for other women, but she thought she could give a voice to a cause that would benefit them. Thanks to Oak, she had those opportunities. For example, the website SurvivorNet reached out to Oak looking for survivors to be featured on their website. So, along with some other local survivors, Mom had a chance to reach a national audience with her story. She got her doctor involved too. Also on the national level, Mom was an important part of a delegation that lobbies Congress for critical funding and legislation. She learned about that at the Survivors Brunch too. There were only a few advocates from Kentucky when she started several years ago, and she was always the only one from our congressional district in Louisville. When she took it a step further in 2023 and journeyed to Washington, D.C. despite her poor physical condition, she was the only advocate from Kentucky. This is a program through the Ovarian Cancer Research Alliance, Oak's national counterpart, and they train advocates on specific bills on what they should ask for. It requires some real closing skills to get members of Congress to commit to supporting these efforts, skills that Mom clearly had. She always found it gratifying to see the changes that may improve survival rates for future generations of women. That feeling was one of her foremost coping mechanisms. As the late Queen Elizabeth II, someone Mom and I both admired, famously said, "My whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." Though Mom never said this out loud, she certainly lived like it, again, selfless, and succeeded with flying colors. Closer to home, one of Mom's favorite ways to educate and raise awareness was the Whisper Walk. She promoted it on social media and recruited as many people as she could to participate. In 2021, when the walk was still virtual due to the pandemic, we had people in 3 states walking with us, including a group on the beach in Florida. We ate, we walked, and we finished up with a Teal mimosa toast. The Whisper Walk is a fun way for family and friends of all ages to show their support. In the process, it raises a lot of money for Oak to keep all these great programs going. Obviously, spreading the word to others is very important, but Mom also spent a lot of time educating herself on the disease and its treatment. Oak helped her stay up to date on important research via seminars and their educational expo. She felt empowered to discuss these things with her providers, and one of her chemo nurses began to affectionately call her his colleague. They might wish she had been a little bit less informed, but the research she did and the ability to monitor herself likely prolonged her life. A battle against cancer is a mental one as much as a physical one, both for the patient and the patient's family. Mom always did what she could to take care of her mental health too. She took advantage of all the resources offered here at Gilda's Club, which I have now started taking advantage of myself. She did meditation and yoga routinely, and she fed her spirit with music and performing arts. We sang in our church choir together until she physically couldn't handle it anymore, and we went to arts performances of all kinds together. She loved going to the opera, and sometimes she loved going nowhere. She always knew when she needed to rest, and we had plenty of our British period dramas to watch together when this was the case. And I'm sure you can imagine how difficult it was for me to finish this season of The Crown without her to vent about it. A common feeling with a cancer diagnosis is a feeling of complete loss of control. Mom liked to organize and plan things, again, a trait I clearly inherited from her. Cancer puts a kink in all those plans and tries to let you know who's boss. It's disorienting, confusing, and quite frankly depressing. But all the things that Oak helped her to do, take care of herself, focusing on education, maintaining connections, and trying to make a difference, helped her to take back that control. Her cancer was absolutely not in control. She simply would not allow it. She confidently figured out ways to take back control, but she also had to learn to balance that with letting go, with surrender. There are limits to what any cancer patient can control, and in Mom's case, she relied on faith. Faith in her medical team to know what was best, faith in her body to withstand the treatments, and faith in God. Mom was asked by countless people, medical providers even, how she was able to endure so much and keep going so strong. Similarly, I've been asked how I've been able to keep it together since she passed. Just like Mom did, I believe the answer is simple: faith and prayer. Prayer sustained her and lifted her at difficult times, and she appreciated it every time someone told her they were praying for her. Just like I do when people tell me that now. This loss would be incomprehensible without my faith. People frequently said to her, and have recently been saying to me, I wish I could do something. All I can do is pray. Let me echo Mom's assurance that praying is doing something, and it is enough. As hard as I've tried to end on a positive note, I cannot neglect to say that losing her is devastating. I no longer have my confidant, my opera buddy, my fellow Anglophile, my other family musician, my greatest defender and supporter, my best friend, my life giver, and my single closest person in life. The feeling of that loss will continue to creep up on me as the time goes by, but in the meantime, the best thing I can do to honor her is to continue advocating for this cause on her behalf. You are all in this room tonight because you know there is a problem and because you want to be a part of the solution. Please keep supporting this great organization so that more women can experience that encouragement and hope. On behalf of ovarian cancer patients, survivors, and their families everywhere, thank you.